Locked out of your own router? In this video, I'll show you the secret password recovery method Cisco doesn't want you to know, including how to bypass passwords using ROMmon mode. Stick around to learn how to reset any Cisco device in minutes, even if you've forgotten all passwords. Memory and password recovery. In this course, we're going to talk about the components of a router. That is, how to save our setup and how to process different iOS images. We'll even see how to recover a forgotten password with the password recovery method. At the very beginning of the training, we saw that the running config is located in the RAM. The startup config is in NVRAM. The iOS image is stored in flash memory. And the iOS loads in RAM. Apart from these memories, a router or switch also has a ROM memory in which several elements are stored. We have the bootstrap code that allows us to initialize the processor and load the iOS. We have the post, which tests all the main elements, such as the CPU, the memories, or the interfaces. And we have the ROMmon, which is a very simple operating system used for troubleshooting and recover a lost password. For example, if the bootstrap code can't locate the iOS, the switch or router will switch to ROMmon mode. It can be compared to the safe mode of Windows. Now, we're going to take a detailed look at what happens when you turn on a router or switch. First, the post runs from the ROM and checks if the hardware is correct and which interfaces or modules are present on the device. Then, the bootstrap launches to locate and load Cisco's iOS software. It determines where is the location of the iOS that should be run. Normally, the iOS image is in the flash memory, but it is possible to tell it to fetch the iOS from a TFTP server. And if the bootstrap doesn't find the iOS, then the ROMmon mode will start. The iOS will therefore be loaded and copied from our flash memory, or a TFTP server to the RAM. Once the iOS has been loaded, the bootstrap code will look for the configuration file in the NVRAM. It will then copy the startup config of the NVRAM into the running config of the RAM. If it can't find any conf files, then the auto-configuration wizard will be run, or it will try to find the conf on a TFTP server. And finally, the Cisco iOS will be well loaded and ready to receive CLI commands. When the bootstrap code searches for the iOS, it does so in several steps. He starts by checking the configuration register. Depending on the register, it starts the system. By default, it launches the iOS present in the flash memory. If he can't find the image, then he's going to check the TFTP server. If an image is present on the server, then it will be launched. And if no image is found, then the ROMmon code will launch. The configuration registry can be used to tell the router or switch to ignore the startup config so that it can recover a misplaced password. By default, the configuration registry is set to 02102, which means that the iOS will be loaded from the flash memory, and it will be the conf file available in the NVRAM that will be executed. That is to say, the startup config. Now, let's say you come back from vacation and you forgot the password to be able to connect to your switch or router. You can, of course, ask your partner, but bad luck. He has just gone on vacation and he has turned off his phone. The only solution is the password recovery method, which consists of modifying the configuration registry to tell it to start, ignoring the startup configuration file, the startup config. This way, we can launch an enable without a password, copy the startup config to our running config, and change the password. Let's see how to do it right away. To start, we will restart our router or switch. During the restart, you will have to press Control and the pause key at the same time. If it's a QWERTY keyboard, it will be Control plus the break key. Then we should arrive in the ROMmon mode. We can now change the configuration register with the command config. Instead of 0x2102, we pass it to 0x2142. This will have the effect of dodging the startup config. We can now restart our equipment. On reboot, it will ignore the startup config present in the NVRAM and start the automatic configuration. Just tell it that you don't want to start the setup by typing no, and you should end up with the command prompt. Without startup config, there is no enable password. We are now in privileged mode. So, we'll be able to copy the startup config into the running config. So be careful not to do the opposite. That is to say, copy the running config to the startup config, because otherwise you can say goodbye to your whole conf and take some time off. We have now recovered all of our original configuration. As we are still in the privileged mode, we will be able to change the password. And finally, all that's left to do is reset the configuration register by default with the config register command to global configuration mode, because otherwise it will continue to zap the startup config and start on a blank configuration. If you forget the password of a Cisco device, access to the router's privileged mode is no longer possible. In this case, you need to do a password recovery procedure, also called a password recovery. Then there may be different ways to recover the password depending on the equipment. In essence, the procedure remains similar. A quick look on Google or the Cisco website allows you to find the procedure that corresponds to each piece of equipment. We will see in detail how to recover the password on a Cisco router. To start, you have to turn off the router and connect a PC to the console port. Then, when you turn the router back on, you have to press the break key several times until you have the ROMmon prompt. For your information, the break key corresponds to the pause key on our French keyboards. In ROMmon mode, the config command is used to check the registry that is currently running. Normally, it should be is21. Then, you have to set the configuration registry to 0x2142 to tell the router to ignore the startup config the next time you reboot. You can then restart the router, which will ignore the startup config. As it has not loaded any configuration, it will then be possible to type, enable, and enter the conf without passwords. So, we have a router with a totally blank running config. Once you log in without the password, you have to get the original configuration and copy it into the running config by doing copy startup config running config. Since the router had started without loading a configuration, all of these interfaces are down. They must be reassembled with the command no shutdown. Then, you can reconfigure a new password with the command enable secret. And all that remains is to put the registry back as it was and saved the running config on the startup config.